She says, Juniper would have loved this. And she continued, it's hard when they leave, but I'm glad kids can come stay with us. Welcome to Book Therapy. I'm your host, Kim Patton. There's no way to count how many books are floating around in this world. Some are decent, some are truly terrible, and some are great. Today we're going to take a deep dive into one great book. Together we will discover gems of truth and encouragement to help you face your current season of life. I'm ready, you're ready, let's get this party started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Book Therapy. I'm so glad you are here. I've been going through the books that I'm going to cover the next few months on Book Therapy, and I have some really great interviews lined up and some nonfiction, maybe even some fiction that I know you're going to love. So buckle up, it's going to be a wild ride. Let's dive into the book. Today we are talking about Keep the Doors Open by Kristin Berry. Lessons learned from a year of foster parenting. Kristin Berry is married to Mike, and they were foster parents for 9 years, and they hosted 23 children. This book is just a highlight of 1 year in those foster care years. At the time of this book, they had 3 adopted children, but in the years to follow, they adopted several more. They host a podcast. They have a very popular website that reaches out to caregivers. So it's called The Resilient Caregiver, and their mission is to help caregivers have the resources that they need to get through the hard times when they're doing, foster care, adoption, any type of kinship care. Mike and Kristin give you the tools to help you succeed. The reason I chose this book is because my family recently moved to South Carolina to enter into a foster care community. So as of December 1st, we have been exploring, learning about, being trained on, and getting to know the people in this foster care community that we are now a part of. I really loved this book when I first read it about a year ago. I wanted to explore her journey with this 1 year in foster care because she covers so many topics that I think are super important to understanding what foster care is. And I also love her stories. I think she is a beautiful writer, and her stories are just so real and vulnerable and honest. And I love seeing the nitty-gritty inside a home. And Kristin does not shy away from the truth. She talks about the hard moments, and I really needed to hear that because it made me just fall in love with the idea of foster care even more, because she didn't shy away from the reality of it, but she focuses on the kids and their hearts and their souls and how they're made in the image of God. And that was really important. That was a really important perspective for me to have. So we're going to start by talking about the babies. Again, like I said, she has 3 adopted children already in her home when she starts doing foster care for this year with her husband. So she gets a 5-week-old baby, Jonathan, and then a week later, she gets his big sister, Juniper, and she's only 18 months old, and she has a feeding tube and some complications, some health complications. So both of them require around-the-clock feeding, and so with these babies, Kristin is absolutely exhausted. She says on page 58, June and Jonathan each had to eat every 2 hours. The children never ate at the same time, which meant hourly feedings. Jonathan ate with no interest and took nearly an hour to take each bottle. By the time Jonathan finished, it was time to prepare June's tube feeding. Mike and I were blurry-eyed and cranky after the first week. By the second week, I was jumpy and on edge. By week 6, I was beginning to feel truly depressed. I was isolated from the rest of the world and couldn't remember the last time I had carried on an adult conversation. On the next page, she talks about talking to her friend on the phone and how her friend listened to her and just said, I'm coming over. You don't have to do this alone. And Kristin was worried about her. She's like, you have your own kids. You can't come take care of me and my kids. But her friend didn't care. It says, Megan came through the front door balancing 2 kids, Dunkin' Donuts coffee, a box of donuts, and a 42-ounce Mountain Dew. I set Jonathan down in his pack and play and ran to the door to help her. In the world of newborn babies and constant feeding, Kristin had to learn an important lesson that she could not do it by herself. She was physically exhausted, she was mentally burnt out, and this, I think, is one of the reasons why she and her husband want to provide so many resources for current foster and adoptive families, because she's lived through it. She knows what that felt like when her friend showed up at the door with donuts and coffee and Mountain Dew, and she knew how much she needed it, but how hard it was to ask for help. After June and Jonathan leave, they get another baby. His name is Gabe, and he's 12 weeks old. She takes him to the doctor's office, and there's a little bit of confusion. On page 102, she's talking about the woman who's taking their registration. It says, she looked at her computer and then at me and again at Gabe. Then she said slowly, I don't know why you think his name is Gabe. What are you trying to pull? I paused before answering, and she took that as license to continue. This Medicaid number is for Matthew Gabriel Jones. I stopped myself from rolling my eyes in exasperation. I'm going to guess that Gabriel is his middle name and that he goes by that. Gabriel. Gabe. She sighed as if I were the one making a stupid mistake. Fine, she replied. She goes on to kind of describe how some people criticize foster parents in the past for doing it for the money, but she almost laughs about that because the stipend is about $17 a day, and she had already spent $100 on formula, clothes, diapers, and gas that would never be reimbursed. Part of being a foster parent is dealing with the system, and we all know that the system is broken and very difficult to deal with and short-staffed. A lot of what she does in this book is describe her day-to-day responsibilities in taking care of the foster kids, and that includes doctor visits, dental appointments, helping them with school, feeding them. In the case of Juniper, it was learning how to feed her through a feeding tube. She's required to have all this communication with DCS, but DCS does not always help her, work with her. She's had many miscommunications where she's assumed to be in error, and DCS just automatically writes her off as a foster parent instead of coming alongside her and believing her and helping her do the best job she can. It's like she has to work extra hard against the system just to keep the kids safe and their paperwork accurate and everything up to date. Another part about foster care, which is a very popular topic for discussion, is when the children leave. On page 120, she has to break the news to her kids that Gabe was taken abruptly out of their home and gone to live with his aunt. While this is a great part about reunification, when family can come forward and take the responsibility of the child, that is definitely something to celebrate, especially if the child is going into a safe home. But that's not always the case. And for Kristin and her family, she has 3 small kids, and they have been used to this little boy in their home for months, and then suddenly he's gone. So they have to cope with their own emotions of Gabe leaving abruptly without their being able to say goodbye. So this transitions us to the next topic, which is kids. Kristin gets a call from her daughter Grace's school, and she goes to get her because Grace is having a hard time. She says on page 122, I could see Grace's swinging legs just past the partially open door. I knocked as I opened it. Grace sat with her elbows on her knees and her head in her hands. She turned her eyes upward toward me and whispered, Sorry, Mommy. She was so much smaller than I remembered. I nodded at the principal and then dropped to my knees beside Grace. You have nothing to be sorry for, I said. She wrapped her little arms around me and cried. After a few moments, I looked at her face again. Her eyes were downcast and her eyebrows wrinkled. Look at my eyes, Grace. I'm not mad, and neither is your teacher. It's okay to be sad. It's not okay to run out of the classroom. Next time you feel this way, please tell an adult and we will try to help, okay? She nodded in response. Would you like to get some lunch with me today? I asked. She looked surprised. Really? I smiled. Yeah, let's go. We have a little time before you have to go back to class. So not only is Kristin juggling the foster children and their needs and her own children and their needs, but this intersection of the relationships built between her foster children and her adopted children is really interesting. And I love how she handled this situation because she did not reprimand her daughter for being sad. She just told her, next time, tell an adult and we can work through this together. Grace was sad because Gabe left abruptly and she didn't get a chance to say goodbye, and she had a hard time articulating those feelings. This story kind of breaks my heart because I'm entering the world with my own daughters, and I have no idea how they are going to react to foster children in our home. I know that it's going to be bumpy, and I know that they are so young that they are for sure not going to be able to articulate their feelings. I would like to have the response that Kristin has, to offer grace and kindness and compassion in the moment instead of focusing on the behavior. I'm trying to learn to focus on the need behind the behavior. And in this case, Grace was sad, and so she reacted as if she was mad. She tried to run away. But Kristin saw through that, and she knew, okay, I have to take a step back and check on my children and see how they're coping with this loss in their lives. Her son, I don't know how old he is, probably 6 or 7 years old. He was born with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, which means that his birth mother consumed alcohol while he was in the womb, and so it affects his impulse control. She says that it makes it difficult for him to control his impulses. He struggles with reading, writing, and auditory processing and has many cognitive delays. However, to most, he looked like any other typically developing student. In this chapter, she talks about a meeting with his teacher to talk through some of the things that he's going through at school. Unfortunately, there is no cure for fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and so the support that he's going to need will go throughout the rest of his life. One beautiful thing that one of her older daughters says when they are on a hayride or in a pumpkin patch and they were going on a hayride, she says, Juniper would have loved this. And she continued, it's hard when they leave, but I'm glad kids can come stay with us. Honestly, that's the biggest thing I've heard about foster care through the years is that people are nervous about getting involved in foster care because they don't want to say goodbye. They don't want a child to leave their home after they have connected with them and built a relationship. This little girl recognizes that there's a both and. It's hard when they leave, but I'm glad they can come stay. Kristin's kids are not old enough to truly see the magnitude of what Kristin and Mike are doing, but they can recognize that it is helpful for these kids to have a safe place to stay for a while. And we can't expect our children to see the big picture all the time, but I do hope that we can teach them how important it is to love others. Even if it costs us something, that's what we do. As children of God who are made in the image of God, we love others because they are made in the image of God. Okay, lastly, we get to teens. That's the other thing you'll hear about foster care is that there's a big need for families to take in teenagers. And most people are scared to death of teenagers. If they have them in their home, they're trying to figure out how to raise those teenagers. And so it's classically difficult for teenagers placed in foster care to find foster homes, and especially permanent homes. So on page 138, we are introduced to Manny. Manny is a quiet teenager, and he comes into the home first, and then a few chapters later, his sister comes, and her name is Angel. You can tell that Manny is quiet, more reserved, and Angel is a little bit feisty. They have been in and out of the system, and Manny, while he loves his sister, he has a hard time with some of the choices that she makes because it ropes him in and makes things worse for him sometimes. So they have a good relationship, but kind of a rocky relationship, like most siblings. You do get to hear a little bit of Angel's story. She says on page 167, we were living with my mom's boyfriend. He told us to get out and threw our stuff on the lawn. My mom made us leave. I couldn't get my things. They're gone. She wiped away a tear and then took a joking tone. It doesn't matter anyway. It's not like it's the first time. So Kristin does what she can. She takes her shopping. She gets her some new stuff. And she shows her where the laundry room is and just helps her feel a little bit more comfortable in the home. And that goes a long way to making Angel feel more comfortable, especially when they go shopping and Kristin buys her some brand new things. That was really a good moment for both of them. Kristin goes on to share that Angel was approved for a full scholarship to an art studio, but unfortunately, it wasn't long before the two teenagers are taken out of the home and sent to live with relatives. And that was really hard to read. I honestly, at that point, I wanted to change the story. I didn't want that to be the real story. I thought, no, this can't be real. This can't be happening. At the end of almost the last chapter, it says, we didn't see Manny or Angel again for 10 years. Reunification is the goal. However, I can see how emotional it can be to have to release these children to someone who you don't fully trust. You know what you can provide for them in your home, and then when someone comes to claim them who is not able to provide the same environment, I'm sure it's so hard to let them go. They're not your children, but when you're tasked with the responsibility of taking care of them for so many months or even years, that's a really hard thing to shake. And Kristin definitely talked about how difficult it is when you're in that situation to just watch these kids walk out your door and go home with someone else. So again, the goal is reunification, and one really cool part of the book is when Juniper and Jonathan get reunited with their family. This story comes at the beginning of the communication between Mike and Kristin Berry and June and Jonathan's birth parents. He says, thank you for coming and thank you for always telling us about their medications and stuff. Their mom can't read and I'm not very good at it. We don't really understand what's going on. Mike and Kristin understand that the goal is to help this family feel capable to take care of their children that they love very much. DCS took them away because it was not safe and they were not meeting the children's needs, especially Juniper's medical needs. But Mike and Kristin have this opportunity to partner with this family and teach them and help them and give them what they need in order to raise their kids. And that was a successful reunification that Mike and Kristin could feel good about because they partnered with them week after week to teach them, and they were able to give them their children back. So we talked about babies and kids and teens. And to wrap it up, I just want to highlight that this story is unique because Kristin has adopted children as well as foster children throughout this book. And there's sometimes where situations and stories come up through the foster children that Kristin can then explore in conversation with her adoptive children. So in the case on page 112, one of her adopted children says, I would have liked for a family member to come get me. Kristin says, I didn't know how to answer her. Foster and adoptive children don't choose to lose their first families, and many struggle throughout life to find their identity. I knew that Christine longed to fit in somewhere and often felt that she didn't fit in with our family. It stung to hear her say the words out loud, but I was equally relieved she was talking about her feelings. Kristin says, I know, I'm sad that didn't happen for you too. I know you would really like to know your relatives. The important thing about talking with children that are adopted is open communication and empathy and relating to their feelings and their struggles as they deal with the loss of their first family. I've thought about this a lot with our girls, and I'm not sure how all those conversations are going to go. I don't really want to think about it, honestly. But what I do know is that Kevin and I have a goal to keep the conversation open and as honest as possible according to their age, because we want them to know that while adoption is a beautiful thing, they also may have a lot of questions and curiosity about where they came from and who their birth family is. So it's a tricky balance, and it's just going to take a lot of prayer and just admitting that I'm not always going to know what to say, and that's okay. Thank you for listening to another episode of Book Therapy. Today we talked about Keep the Doors Open, Lessons Learned from a Year of Foster Parenting by Kristin Berry. Once again, if you look up Kristin Berry and Mike Berry online, they host courses and everything on their website to support foster and adoptive families. They have other books and they have a podcast. So in the foster and adoptive community, these two people are truly, truly helping. Alrighty, see you next time.